let's talk about like funk more because this is something. I mean, you definitely are. You what so-called from what I read is the what's the East Bay sound, the distinctive East Bay sound and funk drumming in the California scene. You know.
Well, I was I had moved to Oakland, and I was playing almost seven. In those days, you had so much work, you'd play 7 nights a week. You'd work all the time. We used to sneak out of working, like pretend to be sick because you'd kill yourself. You'd be playing every night. And we made money, man. We were young people that owned cars, and I bought a house and all kinds of stuff, you know. And um, Paul Jackson walked into my gig one night. I didn't know him from a can of paint, just some dude that came in and sat down, but he kept staring at me. And so on the break, I went over and I said, "Okay, I know you're a musician because you've been peeping me out all night. I'm Mike Clark." And he said, "Hey, I'm Paul Jackson." He said, "I'd love to come up and play." Now, this is an organ band that I had in this club. So I said, "Well, what do you play?" He said, "Well, I'm a bass player, but I can play organ as well." And I said, "Okay, come on up next set." So he came up and he killed on the organ. He wasn't a great organ player, but there was so much blues and so much feeling and so much soul. Like this dude was dripping with it, and he knocked me out. So I said, "Give me your number before you leave, please." And so that night, I gave him my number, and I had a business card. And that night when I got home, back to Oakland, this was out in Walnut Creek somewhere. When I got home that night, he was sitting in my driveway waiting for me. I'd never met this guy before. And he had some African hashish and a bottle of wine. He said, "Hey, man, I've been waiting for you. You want to hang out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, come on in." And that was the beginning of me and Paul. And man, we hung out every day for 30 years after that. We became best
Oh,
friends and
sure.
inseparable, inseparable. And we finally got a place together because both of our girlfriends threw us out. This is true. And so we got Paul's father got us a place out in East Oakland, and it became the epicenter for hanging, playing, rehearsing, girlfriends, eating, all the musicians were over all the time. So we started a bunch of bands. But they were all jazz bands. And then Paul one day came over with a Fender bass and he just stuck it in the music room and left it in there for a year. Never went near it because he played the big bass. And one day he picked up the Fender bass and plugged it into an amp. He said, "Play some of that funky stuff you play." So I did, and he played something that was perfect. It went with it. It was perfect. And the fun now to your question about the Oakland sound, it was kind of like these broken, displaced 16th notes. David Garibaldi, a dear friend of mine with the Tower of Power, and myself were kind of the guys that made that style well known. I had my version of it and he had his. And I didn't do it unless Paul was there. Otherwise, I played jazz. I'm like a real heavy jazz head. I'd be like, "Yeah, that's cool, but I want to play jazz. I want to swing, man." So next to where we lived, there was a barbecue joint called Everett and Jones. And they had just moved up from Georgia, and they were right next door to where we lived. So we'd smell the food coming in every day, and we'd go over there and eat constantly. I'm surprised we didn't have heart attacks because we just ate ribs and potato salad every day. Right? We were
Yeah,
young, we were having
yeah,
fun. So Mrs. Jones said, "If you guys record, I'm gonna if you we're gonna advertise on KDIA, which was the Soul station in Oakland. And if you record something, we'll feed you free for a month." And we're like, "Oh, yeah, you got it." So we wrote on a napkin while we were waiting for our order. We wrote, because you couldn't sit down in there, you had to stand up and wait to get your order. We wrote a tune called "God Make Me Funky," and people could hear it. Then they started advertising the food on KDIA, and you could hear us in the background, and people were calling in saying, "What's that song?" And they liked the song. So it became, so we recorded it later with the Headhunters and it sold 100,000 records and it became one of the most sampled drum loops in hip hop. Probably not anymore, but for a while, everybody, every DJ had to have that loop. And uh, oops, so that's what happened with the funk thing. And then me and Paul are doing that, but then I'm playing with a guy named Vince Guaraldi, and I'm playing with Bobby Hutcherson and Woody Shaw. So I'm ensconced in this jazz thing.